What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Now, today's video, I'm going to be going over how to break the cycle of generational programming. Now, when you look at certain family dynamics, when you look at a certain family and its lineage, right, especially within the black community, within black families, things tend to repeat itself. You know how they always say history repeats itself? Things start to pass things start to pass on, things start to pass down from generation to generation, right? And these things that tend to be passed down from generation to generation could potentially affect, the lineage or the children that are being produced within the family. Right? There's certain things that affect the whole family dynamic as a whole, right? So in this video, I'm going to be going over not only what generational programming is, or generational curses as they would like to call it, but how to break this programming code, how to overcome these generational curses. All right, so let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and get started. So first off, what is generational programming, or what are generational curses? Generational programming or generational curses are specific repeated cycles that continue through generation after generation, right? So we basically learn and, we're shaped and being molded, and we learn everything from our parents, right? And then the parents' children, when they have kids, they end up teaching their kids what they learned from their parents, right? So it's just this repeated cycle that goes on and on and on and on, right? If you're being taught the same things, whether it be, good or whether it be harmful, when you pass that down to your children's children are going to inherit that as well. So it's a repeated generation cycle. Okay? So, from a spiritual aspect, when we look at it from the spiritual lens, everything that a family member does or goes through spiritually trickles down into the family line. Right? So whatever, whether it be your father, whether it be your mother, your sibling, whatever the case may be, whatever the person is going through spiritually, right? They're not in a good space spiritually. If they are, if they have like an alcohol addiction or some sort, they have some type of drug addiction, or, some type of mental health crisis, everything happens in the spiritual before it manifests in the physical, right? So whatever the person is going through internally, whatever the person is going through on a spiritual level, it tends to trickle down into the family line, right? And, it might not occur 100%, but most of the time, if somebody's going through something spiritually, that their children might be affected by it in some way, shape, or form. All right? So when you look at it from a scientific lens, we have this thing called epigenetics, right? And epigenetics is the study of how cells control gene activity without changing the DNA sequence. Our environment and other factors can influence how genes are expressed, right? So the type of environment that you're around, the type of people that you're around, being around family, being around your parents. You might have grown up in a harsh environment, or, an environment that's not very positive in the slightest, or you might have grown up in a good environment, in a clean environment, right? So our environment influences how our genes are expressed, right? So when we have to, if we want to escape the generational programming, if we want to, eliminate all things that we're going through, whether it be anxiety or depression, suicidal thoughts, mental illnesses, mental diseases. If we want to, overcome these things, we have to reprogram our DNA, right? So when we reprogram our DNA, the cells within our genetic code will end up making modifications within our DNA sequence, right? And especially, for the melanated people, right? This epigenetic memory can go all the way back to slavery, right? It goes deeper than that. It goes deep, right? It can go all the way back to slavery. That's why, all the torture, all the torment, all the chaos, all the anxiety, all the the craziness, the chaos that our ancestors have been going through has been passed down from generation to generation to generation, right? But our ancestors didn't intend for us to go through the things that they had went through, right? That's why we're living in this time right now in the age of information, right? We have to study this stuff, learn this stuff, to where we can overcome these obstacles and trials and tribulations, right? Because our ancestors, they lived through us, right? They see what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, right? They didn't intend for us to go through the same things that they did. So that's why it's important for us to, learn more about our history, be in the gym with our life, taking care of ourselves every single day and learning more about how to reprogram our DNA to where we don't repeat the same cycles over and over and over again, especially within the Black household, especially within the Black family, right? We have, single fathers, single mothers, children growing up in single parent households, right? It's like, say for instance, a child who grew up in a two-parent household might experience different things and different outcomes versus a child who grew up in a one-parent household, right? So we have to learn from our mistakes and not repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. When we have children, we don't want to pass down our traumas and not pass down our dark sides to our children, right? Because you don't want your children, your future children, or if you have children right now, you don't want your children going through those type of things. You want the best for your children and your future family. If you don't have children, you expect to have children, or you want children in the future, you don't want your children, you don't want your future family to experience those things. Because you want them to have a better life. You want them to have a good life. So that's why it's always important for us to learn from our mistakes and learn our history and learn more about ourselves, and always take the time to, do the necessary work to reprogram my DNA, right? So, who has the most power and influence over you in your life, right? Is it God? Is it God? Is it your friends? Is it celebrities? No. No. It's your parents, right? Your parents have the most influence and the most, power over you, right? Especially when we're children, when we grow up as children, your parents have the most influence over you, right? It's not God. It's not your friends. It's not celebrities. It's not your teachers. It's your parents, okay? When you were a baby, you had no type of programming within your being, right? When we come into this world, when we're, children, we had no type of, programming and molding and all these different things. We didn't have that within our being, right? That's why children between the ages of 1 to 7, they are very impressionable. They soak up everything around them. They soak up everything within their environment, right? If they see things that their parents do or hear things that their parents say, they tend to pick up on those traits. They tend to pick up on those words that their parents say or what their parents do, right? Because they're around their parents most of the time, especially when we're kids, when we're growing up to be kids and adolescents and teenagers and things of that nature, right? So your parents have the biggest influence on you, right? As we get older, we become shaped and molded by our parents based off of what they learned and experienced, right? For example, religion, right? You could pick up on the same religion that your parents practice or teach or preach about, right? If you grew up in a Christian household, 9 times out of 10, you might become a Christian, right? Or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever the case may be. Politics. We have certain, families that are Democrats. You might be a part of a Democratic family, or your parents might be Republican. You tend to, adopt those Republican views and ideologies, right? So politics is another example. Sports, you might pick up on a certain sports team, or a different type of sport, whether it be soccer or basketball or football. What your father may like, what your mother may like. You tend to pick up on your favorite sports team that your parents like. So these are many different examples of what we can pick up on, what we can download, and the amount of power and influence that our parents have, right? So when we're children, right, we are brought into this world physically by our biological parents, by our biological family, right? And they are our family until we get to a certain age, right? Once we become adults, right? Especially if you're conscious, right? When we start to become conscious, we start to question things. We start to question everything. We start to look at the world differently from our parents and our peers. We have a totally different mindset as opposed to our parents, right? And when you notice, when you try to tell your parents certain things that you learned, or say this and that, and your parents don't want to hear it. Your parents don't want to hear anything that you got to say, or the new stuff that you learned, and all the programming that the world tries to do. Living in this false illusion that we call, this holographic matrix, this illusion that we call reality. They don't want to hear any of that stuff, right? So when we get to a certain age and we start to become conscious, they're no longer our family no more, right? They may be our biological family, but they're not our spiritual family, right? Certain children may be born into a spiritual household where everybody is spiritual, where everybody's on the same frequency, where everybody is one in the household, but that's pretty rare in most cases. So you have, you look at it when a family has a certain amount of children, whether it be like 4 children, and maybe 1 out of the 4 children is considered the black sheep, or the outcast, or the child that's very different from the rest of their siblings, right? So when we get to a certain age and we start to become conscious, they're no longer our family anymore, because we have nothing in common with them. If they were your family, they will understand you on a spiritual level, on an innate level, but they don't, right? That's why we have, we may have disagreements with our families. We may have different viewpoints, and we just feel alienated and isolated from our parents and our peers and our friends and things of that nature, right? So that's why you always hear people say, find your tribe season, find your spiritual family. It's important for you to find your spiritual family and find people that you're able to connect with, right? People that have the same, viewpoints as you, people that are on the same frequency as you, people that, understand you on a spiritual level, on a deep inner level. So that's why it's important for all of us to find our tribe and to find our spiritual family. All right. So we are literally walking hard drives, right? We store and collect data and information as we go through life, right? So when we, when we're going to school, when we're going to the park, when we go to work, when we go to these certain places, and when we maneuver through these different environments, we are walking hard drives. We store and collect data and information as we move through this thing called life, okay? It's important for us to be mindful of what we consume. It's very important to be mindful of what we consume, right? When we pick up on certain things, whether it be from our friends, when we pick up things from our parents, teachers, social media, different celebrities, most people don't have their best interest in you. That's why it's very important for you to use your gift of discernment, right? Discern what is, right for you in your life, what is valuable in your life, the type of information that resonates with you, and the information that doesn't resonate with you, that you necessarily don't agree with. You need to have discernment and be careful what you consume on a day-to-day basis. That's very important, right? What you read about, what you watch, what you when you're watching me, for example, You don't have to believe everything I say. You don't have to agree with everything that I say. Go out of your way to do your own research, right? It's important for you to do your own research when you're studying something, when you're listening to what I'm talking about. Actually, take the time to do research on visualization. Take the time to do research on meditation. Take the time to do research on specific religions or whatever the case may be, right? So it's always important for us to be able to be mindful of what we consume on a day-to-day basis. Okay? So, how does one break the program? How does one break the program and, escape the cycle of, generational programming or generational curses? Okay? We have to rewire our DNA, right? So when we rewire our DNA, the cells that operate within our genetic code make modifications. They make certain modifications within our DNA sequence, right? So we have to rewire our DNA in order for us to break this cycle of generational curses or generational programming. So what are the things that you could be doing to break this cycle, right? To change your mind, to change your thinking patterns, right? To escape the attachments and the labels that your parents might have given you or society might have given you. We tend to label ourselves as being Christian, or we label ourselves as being white or black, or we label ourselves as being Democrat or Republican, or we attach ourselves to our favorite sports team, right? And we identify with these attachments and these labels, but we are none of these things, right? We are formless. We are energetic. We are timeless. Right? We have to think about ourselves like that, right? So you are not your physical body. You are not your thoughts. You are not your ideologies. You are not your religion. You're not your political party. You are none of these things. You are formless, and you are energetic, and you are powerful, and you are eternal. Okay? So some of the things that you can do: meditation. Meditation is a great way for you to reprogram your DNA, right? When you connect yourself, when you, go into inner space. When we meditate, we go into inner space, or we block out the outside world, and we start to become more of an observer, right? Once we start to become more of an observer, we're able to observe how we're feeling. We're able to observe, the kind of state that we're in. We're able to learn ourselves more. We're able to understand ourselves more. So meditation is a great way for you to reprogram your DNA, right? Visualization. I have a video on visualization as well. I'll leave that link down in the description. You guys want to check that out. Visualization is a great way for you to reprogram your DNA. When you visualize yourself, looking a certain way, acting a certain way, talking a certain way, this is a very powerful tool, right? Visualization is a very powerful tool for you to, reprogram not only your DNA, but your mind as well, right? Our thoughts, when we reprogram our thoughts leads to feelings. We have those feelings. We start feeling good about ourselves. We have that self-righteousness, right? We start to have that positive self-image about ourselves, and that leads us to taking action to whatever we want to do, whatever we want to become, and that leads to those results, right? So check that visualization video out if you get the chance, right? So affirmations, practicing affirmations, speaking into existence, right? When we, reprogram our subconscious mind, right? When we have that positive self-image about ourselves and we speak these positive things into existence, then that turns into those beliefs. And those beliefs turn into perception, right? And perception creates reality, right? So affirmations is a great way for you to reprogram your DNA, okay? Sunlight, sunlight, getting in the sun, exposing yourself to the sun, getting nature. That's another great way for you to reprogram your DNA, right? Diet, having a great diet, having a good diet. I don't even have to explain this. Having a good diet is a good way for you. is a good thing for the human body as a whole. I'm not gonna get into the the scientific the specifics and the science behind it, but just know that diet is great for the human body. The body needs nutrients and vitamins and minerals to be able to function properly, right? Because energy is needed for the third dimension, right? So you need nutritious foods to help fuel your body, right? Because the body doesn't care about the food in itself. The body only cares about the nutrients that's in the food, right? And when you digest that food, that converts it into energy, right? That converts it into chemical energy, right? So having a good diet is a great way for you to reprogram your DNA as well. Exercise is the same thing, just moving around. You don't have to be doing no weightlifting or high intensity workouts. Just go for a walk. Go for a walk in nature. That's a great way for you to get your exercise in. Just move your body. Just always moving your body. Okay? And having the right intentions, right? When you have that heart and mind coherence, when you have that conscious and subconscious mind in unison, right? When these two things work together, you tend to have the right intentions about life, right? You have inner intention and outer intention, right? So when we have positive intentions, we start to become grateful, and we, step into our purpose, right? That is another great way for you to reprogram your DNA, reprogram your mind as a whole, right? So this is how to break the cycle of generational programming. Too often we don't speak about this type of stuff. We don't learn about this stuff. We don't talk about this type of stuff. And history tends to repeat itself within the family dynamic. So it's important for us to learn more about our history, learn more about, what our ancestors have gone through, right? What our ancestors used to do back in the past, right? And this will fix everything within the family dynamic, and we won't be repeating the same negative cycles over and over and over again, right? So that's why it's important for us to, teach this to the youth, because the youth is the future, right? When we become a more of a positive influence for the youth, for the children, for the kids, right? They can learn from our mistakes. They can learn from our mishaps. They can learn from the things that we've gone through, so they won't repeat the same things that we've gone through. So it's important for us to talk about these things and, teach our kids how to, become responsible people. Give them something to look for, because we all have a purpose in life, right? So this is very important. Hopefully you guys have learned something from this video. Share this video if you can. And hopefully this is helpful. All right? So till next time. And always remember, all power resides from within. And always keep the faith, because God in the universe is always working for you. Take care, guys, and God bless.